Hey ladies, welcome back. Haven't posted in a while again. Things have been busy. But we're still continuing on with the series of biblical womanhood, the roles of women within the Bible when the women are mentioned. So the first video was, it's been so long I'm forgetting the last video. Oh, a woman of godly character. So if you haven't watched that video, go check it out. I don't know where I'm going to put the card. Go check that video out. This is going to be the second part of the series, of this series. And it's going to be about the role of women in marriage. So I'm going to try my best to try to understand this because I'm single. But what I'm going to emphasize in this video is about the character of the women who are preparing for marriage. So you're going to see a lot of that. In this world where there is so much gender confusion about identity, gender identity, and things such as fluidity in this world, this video is going to help with understanding the role of a woman in a marriage, the role of women who are in a marriage, or those who desire marriage, the role of women in marriage. Because it starts from what the children see the parents' roles are. We're going to discuss how the household should look like, or most of the verses were mentioned in the last video, but this video is studying the character of the women who were preparing for marriage. But this video is going to help to make that distinction and how it's important with such things in this world, such as that. We're going to go back to the truth, which is the Word of God, to understand the distinction between roles. Let's get started. I'm going to use different books and different women in the Bible pertaining to this. And I'm going to try my best to not shorten is not the word, to concise this so that this video is not too long. So I'm going to highlight the important parts that stood out to me. So the woman in the Bible that I'm going to study is Sarah, and you can find this in Genesis 12 verses 5 to 15, and also Genesis 20 verses 2 to 3. Then we're going to study Rachel, I believe, is next. No, Rebecca, which is in Genesis 24 chapter 24 verses 15 to 21, and then verses 57 to 58. Then Rachel, which is in Genesis chapter 29 verses 9 to 12, and then the book of Ruth. So I'm first going to read Genesis 12 verses 5 to 15, and then on to 20 verses 2 to 3. I'm going to read them together because the situation, part of the situation, that scene that happened here is like the same. And this is going to be about Sarah. He took his wife Sarai, his nephew Lot, all the possession they had accumulated, and the people they had acquired in Haran. They set out for the land of Canaan, and they arrived there. Abraham traveled through the land as far as the site of the great tree of Moreh at Shechem. At that time, the Canaanites were in the land. The Lord appeared to Abraham and said, "To your offspring I'll give this land." So he built an altar there to the Lord who had appeared to him. From there he went on towards the hills of Bethel and pitched his tent, with Bethel on the west and Ai on the east. There he built an altar to the Lord and called on the name of the Lord. Then Abraham set out and continued toward the Negev. Now there was a famine in the land, and Abraham went down to Egypt to live there for a while, because the famine was severe. As he was about to enter Egypt, he said to his wife Sarai, I know what a beautiful woman you are. When the Egyptians see you, they will say, this is his wife. Then they will kill me, but let you live. Okay, now into Genesis 20. And there Abraham said of his wife Sarah, she is my sister. Then Abimelech, king of Gerar, sent for Sarah and took her. But God came to Abimelech in a dream one night and said to him, you are as good as dead because of the woman you have taken. She is a married woman. In these verses, it mentions a little bit about Sarah. Not a lot is mentioned about Sarah. So it was really hard trying to study her character. And I was also debating on whether to include Sarah too, because I was thinking about 1 Peter chapter 3 verse 6, where it says that Sarah saw Abraham as Lord, as it was mentioning a woman's submission, a wife's submission to the husband. But I don't know if this instance will show, as I'm going to further explain, this instance will show if this is one of the instances that show that, oh, Sarah submitted to Abraham and saw him as Lord, like her submission. Because it could just be Sarah just saw Abraham as Lord and that was it. Because I don't want to speak on where scripture's silent. So I'm kind of debating. I was debating sharing this. But I'll share with you the explanation of these verses. So Sarah, it showed that, well, God called Abraham, and Abraham had to move to a foreign land, move from his country. And then it said that he took everything with him, and even Sarah. So Sarah had to follow along, obviously. And also in the case of Abraham telling Sarah to say that he is his sister, and not saying that this is right, this was Abraham's sin. But I just want to emphasize Sarah's character of submission. And also, it wasn't like Abraham was completely in sin. He believed God, he believed in God, he had the right relationship with God. But I'm just trying to emphasize the way Sarah submitted, her submission. And this is a question for those of us in the future, or those who are already. Like, how can I submit to a man if I don't think he's right? And this is not regarding sin things, but things which you believe would be a better or wiser choice to do. And what I got from it, from what I've heard from the women I've just seen online and followed, is just to, state your concerns, pray to God about it. But if the man's not seeing where you're going, or he's made his decision, but he's considered you, but he's made his decision to submit and trust God with the situation. And if it happens to be wrong, trust that he will fix it. At the end of the day, it's our trust in God, not really the man. Give grace as well, because we all make mistakes. Well, that's it on Sarah. Now I want to move to Rebecca, which is in Genesis 24, verses 15 to 21. Before he had finished praying, Rebecca came out with her jar on her shoulder. She was the daughter of Bethuel, son of Milcah, who was the wife of Abraham's brother Nahor. The woman was very beautiful, a virgin. No man had ever slept with her. She went down to the spring, filled her jar, and came up again. The servant hurried to meet her and said, "Give me a little water from your jar." "Drink, my lord," she said, and quickly lowered the jar to her hands and gave him a drink. After she had given him a drink, she said, I'll draw water for your camels too until they have enough to drink." So she quickly emptied her jar into the throw, ran back to the well to draw more water, and drew enough for all his camels. Without saying a word, the man watched her closely to learn whether or not the Lord had made his journey successful. So here you hear a little bit about the character of Rebecca. And Rebecca was going to be Isaac's wife in the Bible. It was going to be Isaac's wife. So far, even within the text I've just read, you see her serving. But I want to touch on virgin so far and how it's uplifted in the Bible and how it's important. Virginity is very important to God and to masculine men for this reason. And it's uplifted in the Bible. There's a reason for it. For this reason. There's a reason for it. It prevented a lot of issues, especially during this time with land and property. And it even prevents other problems too in our modern times, from being heartbroken, from diseases. So it is very important saving yourself for marriage. And when God sees you honoring your body, honoring him with your body by saving yourself for marriage, you'll see the benefits when it's time and God's will, when you are married, how important it was to save yourself and the importance of virginity as well. God will honor that, and the godly man will respect you as well. I want to move on to verse 18, where it said, "Drink, my lord," she said, and quickly lowered the jar to her hands and gave him a drink. So you can see how humble and submissive Rebecca was. Even to the man, she called him Lord, and that's how the woman would greet the men and respect the older men, by calling them Lord, small l, lowercase l. That's not what I see today. Some of us women will pick on men for the sake of joking, but I don't believe that is appropriate. Yeah, she was respectful to the man, which you don't see today. You don't see as much today. As I continue on to the next verses, you also see her generosity and in her service when she was feeding the camels as well, the other camels as well. This just reminds me of homemaking, how, and in Proverbs 31 as well, how the woman will consider others and make sure everyone has everything. I don't know why this situation just makes me think of it, but it does. Rebecca showed that she was eager to serve. I'm going to move on to verses 57 to 58. Still the same chapter. Then they said, "Let's call the young woman and ask her about it." So they called Rebecca and asked her, "Will you go with this man?" "I will go," she said. The context of this verse is Abraham's servant told Rebecca's family all about how he believes God chose Rebecca for Isaac, or how they've prayed and answered about how they were trying to get a wife for Isaac, how God has answered. And now he turned to Rebecca to consider her on what she would want to do. And Rebecca is submissive in her response. Alright, I'm going to move on to Rachel, and you can find this in Genesis chapter 29. It's going to be verses 9 to 12. While he was still talking with them, Rachel came with her father's sheep, for she was a shepherd. When Jacob saw Rachel, daughter of his uncle Laban, and Laban's sheep, she went over and rolled the stone away from the mouth of the well, and watered his uncle's sheep. Then Jacob kissed Rachel and began to weep aloud. He had told Rachel that he was a relative of her father and a son of Rebekah, so she ran and told her father. You see the occupation of Rachel. It says that she was a shepherdess. So she shepherded flock, I believe so. And so far I've learned with the women, the character of the women that I've went over, is that they really served. It's not that they were sitting and waiting, doing nothing, but they were productive, they were serving as marriage eventually came. A godly woman isn't selfish or lazy. And another thing I noticed is that, notice how the men went to go find these women. He who finds a wife still stands true today. But these women weren't waiting, doing nothing. As I said, these women weren't perfect. But one thing I believe we can take away is those who desire marriage and are waiting is to focus on becoming a godly woman. And then a godly man will see that. Masculine men love feminine women, and these women appeared soft. Alright, on to the book of Ruth, which is different. I'm going to go over chapters 1 to 4, but I'm going to highlight the important parts, not verse by verse, obviously. But I'm going to highlight the important parts. If you're not too familiar with the book of Ruth, the context is that there's a woman named Naomi. Her and her family lived in a foreign land, but her husband died and then her 2 sons died who were married. And now who was left was Naomi and her 2 daughter-in-laws. So when that happened, after that, she urged Ruth and the other women to go, that there's no point in staying. And at first, the other woman didn't want to go, and Ruth didn't want to go either. But eventually, as Naomi continued to urge them to go, the other woman left, but Ruth still stayed. Naomi was very grieved by the death of her family, that she was bitter towards life and towards God. But Ruth decided to still stay with her. But Ruth chose to stay with her, even though Naomi urged her again and again to go. And you can see her blessing on how God blessed her, how she was blessed by the decision that she made. You can follow me on chapter 1 of the book of Ruth. That's where I'm going to start. But I want to speed forward. No, that's not a word. I want to go to verse 16, where Naomi was urging Ruth to go. But she said, no, I'll say, your people will be my people. Your God will be my God. And I just see the character of Ruth, how she had faith in the God of Israel. So Ruth was a foreigner, but she heard about the God of Israel and chose to believe. Being a godly woman, having faith in God, is very important in the preparation, in the role of marriage. I see that as a highlight. I can also see Ruth's service as well. She had her whole life ahead of her. I don't know how old she was, but she decided to stay with Naomi, who was well on her years. It just shows me that she was ready to give up her own life, what she was familiar with, to serve Naomi. And then you're going to see it again with Boaz, the man that she meets as well. It wasn't for herself, but she looked after others. It really takes the grace of God to become this type of woman. I know this video is about the role of marriage, but I want to mention things leading up to that point. And now I think I'm going to move on to the next chapter, right? The next chapter. Yes. So now I'm on the next chapter, verse 2. And Ruth the Moabite said to Naomi, "Let me go to the fields and pick up the leftover grain behind anyone in whose eyes I find favor." So you see her service again. She was working. She wasn't doing nothing. And this made it so that it caught the attention of Boaz. Moving to verse 10 in Ruth chapter 2, it says, "At this she bowed down with her face to the ground. She asked him, 'Why have I found such favor in your eyes that you notice me, a foreigner?'" So you can see her humility in her response. And then Boaz responds, "I have been told all about what you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband. How you have left your father and mother and your homeland and came to live with a people you did not know before." As I said, Boaz noticed her character. And this is what we as women should be focusing on. Developing, becoming a godly woman in the preparation. It's character that will catch the godly man. And Ruth, what I also noticed is that she was submissive to what Boaz said. Like in verse 8, it says, "So Boaz said to Ruth, 'My daughter, listen to me. Do not go and glean in another field, and do not go away from here. Stay here with the women who work for me.'" I'm going to move on to the next chapter, which is chapter 3. A brief summary here. Naomi gives Ruth wisdom and advice. I would say wisdom. What I also see is God orchestrating all of this for his plan and glorious purposes, bigger plan as well. Because the end of this book, Ruth is a descendant. No, David, the King David Ruth is one of his descendants. And through the line of David comes Jesus. I just wanted to focus on the character of Ruth in this book. That's what I've noticed about God orchestrating this plan of Boaz and Ruth for his bigger plan and glorious purpose. I want to look at verse 8. It says, "In the middle of the night, something startled the man. He turned, and there was a woman lying at his feet." I think the meaning behind verse 8 is Ruth was showing that she was ready to serve Boaz. I made a mistake, ladies. This act of Ruth shows her intent to claim Boaz as the guardian redeemer. And this is very important in Jewish culture, which means that he's the relative obligated to marry her and also provide for Naomi. So this is very important because it shows Ruth's belief and how important this is. And it's all under submission to God's plan. And she doesn't do it scandalously, but it's all under submission to God's plan. And then eventually they would get married, which eventually led to marriage. Let me put it that way. Then in verse 11, which also was a highlight, "And now, my daughter, don't be afraid. I will do for you all you ask. All the people of my town know that you are a woman of noble character." So here you see Boaz praising Ruth, and it just reminds me of Proverbs 31, chapter 31, verse 31, where it says, let me get it exactly, "Honor her for all that her hands have done, and let her works bring her praise at the city gate." It just reminds me of that, how Boaz was praising Ruth because of her service. And it was mentioned before how she left everything and stayed with Naomi to take care of her. Another thing that was shown in this chapter 3, is it looked like the woman was initiating here, but that doesn't mean women can't initiate or show interest, express interest. But that is different from leading a relationship. The remainder of the chapter, like verses 12 to 13, it shows Boaz's character as well. That he's careful, he's considerate, he waits for Ruth, and he's also generous towards her. This is the character that we should see. This is what we should see in a man. This is godly character. And it just reminds me of that verse that love is patient. I don't know why, but you get a glimpse of Boaz's character as well. These are the key things to look for in a man, his character. Now on to the last chapter, which is chapter 4. The first few verses are just practical legal stuff, where Boaz was talking about the guardian redeemer. So he lets the elders know about what he told Ruth that he was going to tell the elders. So what he told Ruth he was going to do, he did. So he's trustworthy. Again, another key thing to look for in a man, his character. There wasn't much on Ruth in this chapter. What I really saw was how God was orchestrating this plan of Boaz and Ruth for his purpose. But what I did take away from the character of Ruth was how she was submissive and ready to serve. And that's important in the role of marriage. It was not about herself. She was ready to give up her life to stay with Naomi, to take care of her. And also with Boaz, she showed she was ready to serve him as well, which eventually it led to marriage, them being married, which eventually they got married. We as women need to focus on becoming godly women in our preparation, in our waiting for those who desire marriage and according to God's will and timing. Developing into a godly woman and having godly character. And that's simply by just putting your trust in God. These women weren't perfect, but they put their trust in God. That's all I have for this video. I pray that it did help. It did challenge your thinking. But just wanted to put this video out there in this series to help us to encourage us to become the women that God has called us to be, and to discern the truths of the role in a marriage as well, which most of us didn't grow up knowing and learning. The Word of God will help you a lot in it. Alright, that's it for this video. See you in the next video. Bye. I am a woman of God, in my nature, in my thoughts. I am a woman of God, a quiet and gentle spirit.